Hey everyone, today I wanted to talk about what awakening out of form means for the seeker. Many times we believe that the seeker or our thoughts that come through can lead us to this awakening that we are looking for, um, of no thought and a higher consciousness. Though many times it is the thoughts that actually give way to a higher intelligence within our brain and our consciousness. Because the more we meditate and understand the dualistic nature of the mind, we realize that we can not only bypass the mind, but we can gain lessons intuitively through the natural understanding or intelligence of the brain. Because unlike the mind, the natural intelligence within our brain can understand the dualistic nature past the mind, which is producing these thoughts. Though the mind is merely a tool to show you what kind of potential is also in store for you, because ultimately the mind is only showing you what its default nature is or its conditioning is. Even though it can seem to have a lot of uh, default goodies in there, it's actually very limited when you understand that its positives and negatives are immediately linked together. Because when we have a positive incident within our mind, we don't associate it with the negatives, although we don't like to, although it is directly associated. Just like when we are feeling negative, when we are having negative thoughts, the automatic reality for the mind is to create this tendency to want positivity to neutralize the thoughts, though that is the opposite of what the brain knows to be true, or as consciousness begins to grasp. Because to seek positivity is the play of the mind, because we'd only want to feel or um, have certain thoughts that can neutralize the negative thoughts. But these thoughts, positive and negative, are the dualistic thoughts. And so to decline the positive thoughts and the well-being emotions is also a necessity of coming into an awakening process, because to cling on to the positive thoughts is really negativity or duality simultaneously. Sometimes you'll notice the mind going back and forth between positivity and negativity, especially when you are trying to meditate and disassociate, because it is the most easiest way for you to identify with thoughts through offering one side of the coin. But they are both illusions. There is no positive and negative. They are secretly oneness. They are secretly both yin and yang. They are secretly everything that is. Understand the dualistic nature of the mind, you won't take any positivity too seriously too, because you understand that it is simultaneously linked with a negative or a lack aspect that can make you feel as if you need to cling on to something in the fear of losing it. And that is ultimately how the mind works, through identification, and it will use anything. You then begin to see that the mind cannot create without bringing duality into the picture. And that is the beauty, because you can still operate in the world using the mind in a dynamic way, because ultimately you see that all the mind patterns, they're a flow of duality under this whole oneness. And when you realize that, you won't take the pulling of emotions and thoughts too seriously, because you realize that out there is also an equal and opposite relative to it. And you realize that there's very little meaning in thoughts, if nothing at all, there's no meaning. It's only the meaning as consciousness that we give to it. And if we understand that if we take wanting to be happy and at peace too seriously, it gives way to this equal opposite, which is taking the negative and being able to extinguish it seriously as well, which is also an illusion of the mind. Though if we want to understand what our awakening is and the universal process, we only have to look to nature, because it shows us for us. It is a happening, and it can only be grasped when you are not associated with the duality of the mind. The thing about the world today is not the actual consciousness itself, just that the consciousness is completely absorbed in the duality and the nature of the mind to fuel their ego's needs, which ultimately keeps consciousness trapped in a cycle through lifetime after lifetime for searching for fulfillment outside of oneself. And while this is always appealing to the mind, it is never going to get you out of the loop of suffering, believing that everything is ultimately negative, because the mind can only keep a sense of positivity flowing through the idea of hope or something out there in the future, or even in the past for clinging onto memories that give you a sense of who you are, though they only come with drawbacks because this sense of who you are also keeps you trapped in the dualistic nature of the mind. But this only lives in the mind, this doesn't live in the body or the consciousness. The emotions can only be linked to the mind when the mind is active, though emotions are merely just emotions when you are at a pure state of awareness. And what's great about this is that you can actually feel the emotions completely. You don't have to identify with them, and you can understand where feelings of anger, shame, and fear come from, and they can automatically be transmuted. Though the state we live in our society is very limited, because instead of our chakras and our spinning balls of energy working naturally, they are being condensed and trapped balls of energy that aren't flowing in accordance with the will of nature, because nature intends for consciousness to flow where it wants to, and while it is doing so only to the extent of what the ego allows, which is being controlled every which way, left and right, during in our society. Once you begin to awaken, the allure to fitting in to society begins to falter, because you realize that it is only a fulfillment throughout the mind in which the ego becomes gratified in the process. And once these steps are taken into the idea that positivity, like light and dark, can't go without one another, you understand, like Alan Watts likes to go over in many of his lectures, that to grow in awakening is to simply disidentify from the mind. Because like duality, oneness cannot exist without it. It is only understood through duality, and that is the beauty of why we are here, to understand that this conscious tunnel of awakening is to understand consciousness at a higher reality, at the experience of oneness, instead of the experience of oneness in the condensed understanding of duality, which is back and forth positive and negativity. It is like a spinning wheel going faster and faster and faster until it obliterates itself, because ultimately it is going round in circles. That's all the mind is. It cannot find anything within itself. What it's really searching for is the ultimate totality of the present moment and pure consciousness. Though because we identify with the mind, which is ultimately a cut piece of the past, or conditionings and traumas made up from the mind that want to survive within us, this awakening to consciousness and the truth of who we are becomes limited to the idea that we are our thoughts. When you realize the duality of the mind, you begin to see strong negative emotions or negative thoughts immediately the same as positivity. They become almost neutralized, because you immediately know that to feel liberation is to feel the opposite. Though true liberation comes from understanding that positivity and negativity are the same pool within the mind, to keep one identified on the illusion that there is even something to gain through the mind, though it is literally just form, sensations, and images throughout the mind that create an energetic pool to keep consciousness identified with form itself. And this is the only way to awaken outside of the mind, to understand that there is really no positivity or negativity, no duality or oneness. There is just simply what is. And like everyone, consciousness can only know when it is not identified with the mind, when it is conscious. And that is the dualistic nature of the process of awakening on this planet. Because so many people are identified with the mind that there is no even reconciliation, that there is a dualistic nature happening within their mind, that their reality is their thoughts. And therefore there's not even this childlike nature that wants to play or just laugh at the back and forth nature of the mind and what life is. It is so constructed to the social conformities that so many of us are just lost in this matrix, not understanding that there is an entire ascension process happening through this planet and on a universal scale. And if you are awake at this moment in this lifetime, you are a key part in this process to our awakening, because you see through the grid work that 3D consciousness has given us. You understand that it is merely a play, and this is what ultimately gives one pure peace, not a peace that is always coming and going through attainment and satisfaction of the ego, which is always going to be interlinked with a feeling of lack because it is always leaving. And we are gratifying ourselves through the same play, through looking forward to a future event that is ultimately never going to become, because it is always a mental projection. You realize that all duality exists within the mind. You realize that there is nothing about you that is imperfect or incomplete or by any means negative, because the mind can only want to see more positive aspects about itself because it views negative, but it is self-created. And they are like functions. Like when you see like a software in a computer, you realize that this is what has been ingrained through the conditioning of the mind to keep one trapped in this Maya, but it is all an illusion. It is all a play. It's already been like orchestrated, from your experiences till here, till the end of this existence. That's not to give the illusion of control or no control. Everything is relative towards the witness and the level of identification, though ultimately you are the pure witness behind this dualistic nature that is this human existence. And you can rise above it by simply understanding that as soon as a thought comes, it is automatically oneness itself. Everything is the divine. You see that everything is in duality in the process of the mind. You realize that you don't actually have a life situation or even conditioning, because you realize that the process of the mind explaining its own conditioning is the conditioning itself. Because many times we are identified with the perceiver, the thought process which is the perceiver. We have an amount of identification with the perceiver, though the perceiver is always tainted by the conditioning, because it is maneuvering itself in such a way to understand the conditioning based off how it's affected the perceiver. So therefore the perceiver is also part of the conditioning or the duality. And that's why we suffer when we believe that we are doing everything in our power as consciousness to understand our awakening. Though this is what allows this true understanding of letting go to take place, which is more than just a mental decision to let go. It has to come from your very being to understand that all you are perceiving is the illusory nature of the human mind. There may be a part of you that feels like it is being forced to go through more than what you'd expect to handle. It is in reality you are the process of the awakening. You are not any separate doer that is suffering through their own means. It is all one universal play that is guiding this conscious evolving of the planet. And so for the seeker, it is an awareness that everything is happening in the mind, for then the seeker to understand its own immediate enlightenment, therefore to help others realize the same truth, that it is only a dualistic nature of the mind that's producing any interpreted signs of suffering. See that you cannot avoid the human function of duality appearing in every second that simply is. You begin to laugh and see that the mind cannot stop producing duality. It has to taste, and you have to taste as consciousness. And that is what's so beautiful, because you see the game, you understand that this is all to help consciousness evolve. And then you realize within your heart, every single time you're going through a tough time, during your life, whether that be outside circumstances or inner turmoil, you realize that it's all under a play of oneness and total interconnectivity, but in the same way, it is what allows us to truly experience and enjoy life, and to understand that the universe is blessing us all throughout this life to understand the universe itself as the universe, to really reflect on our own experience and manifestation of what we are as consciousness. Life is not a means to simply become a certain being or achieve certain results, but to enjoy the flow of life that simply is interconnectivity and pure awareness. And because when you realize that desirelessness is the key to awakening, you realize that duality is what allows you to experience oneness to its full entirety. Because if you were simply the consciousness of everything that is, you wouldn't understand what a human experience is. You would not be able to sympathize with the beings here on earth. And at the same time, you could not understand the oneness that simply is everything in this universe within this human suit, within this vessel. And that's what's so beautiful about this human lifetime, is that it is all to help us realize our own connectivity, which is this entire happening, this entire universal happening. And if you got anything from this video, please make sure to subscribe. Thank you for viewing this video. Take care.